Thanks, Kent. Good morning, everyone. My name is Mark Pesce. I am a professional futurist. Now, when people hear the word futurist, quite often they think, ooh, you must be a psychic. You're busy predicting the future. And in fact, nothing could be further from the truth. There's no extrasensory perception required. Why? Because in fact, we can take a look at the present to understand the future. There's a wonderful quote from science fiction author William Gibson. He is the man who more than a generation ago coined the word cyberspace. Here's what he says about the future. The future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. That means if we look closely at the present, we can understand, we can see the green shoots of the future popping up. It's not everywhere. It's over there and maybe over there. It's in a few places because when it's everywhere, it's no longer the future, it's the present. But this is exactly why the future has a nasty habit of sneaking up on us, because the future is already with us. And it sneaks up on us because we're not looking out for it. If we take our eyes off that future, if we take our eyes off the future even for a moment, it can actually grow beyond all bounds, beyond any hope of containment. It can burst on the scene. It can mount an attack on us. And in general, we are not very good at keeping our eye on the future. We're always looking around at the things we expect to see and not for the bits of the future that are popping up all around us. So we miss those bits. And when we miss the future, we end up taking unexpected risks. Risks that we generally don't recognize until it is far, far too late. How many stories have you heard about a company that was doing very well, had no worries, it was smooth sailing ahead, and then in a flash, the tempest arrives and it all disappears without a trace? Now, in the last 30 years, there are some really big names that are on that list. Nokia, Kodak, Polaroid, Sears and Roebuck, which was the biggest reeler in America when I was growing up, Lotus Software, Sun Microsystems, and Borders Books. All of these were multi-billion-dollar, very successful enterprises, and they all disappeared practically overnight. Now, we call this disruption, that technology came along or something else came along and disrupted their businesses, but that's really what we tell ourselves to tell ourselves, well, that can't actually happen to us. What we should call this is the price of ignoring the future, because that's what every single one of those companies they did. And they didn't do it just once. They didn't do it for a week or for a month or for a year. They did it consistently so that when the future arrived, well, there was no room for them in that future and they disappeared. I want to believe that the same thing won't happen to any of you, that we have managed to learn from our mistakes. But I have got some bad news for you, because we seem to be keeping on keeping on. We really haven't changed a thing. And why would we want to? Because seriously, no one likes to change, even when inaction is going to cost you everything. Not even that, it turns out, is enough to actually move us. So it's not really about disruption. It's that we're lazy, we're comfortable, and we don't feel the fear of the future that we should right down in our guts. So let me see what I can do to help us fix that. The first thing that you need to know about the future is something that's going on in the present. It's something you already know. There's a war on. And I mean the war of invasion, Russia invading Ukraine. It's the most visible manifestation of something that is far more broad, because it's war all the way down. It is a war for your markets. It's a war for your customers. It's a war for your attention. It's a war for ever decreasing supplies of key components and key materials. Those are just the things that we can see, because then there are all sorts of things that are going on invisibly. Silent, invisible corruption from every direction. To be connected in 2022 is to be open to attack. All of us are connected. all of us are wide open to attack. And that means that the war is actually happening everywhere around us. But we're acting as if this is all perfectly fine. Let me tell you, this is not fine. Far from it. We are entering a new era. We're entering a time when we're beating our plowshares into swords, when we're going to be going on the attack, if we're ready for it. Now, if we've waited too long, like Kodak did, if we aren't flexible enough, like Sun, or if we aren't fast enough, like Nokia, or if we're just too lazy, like Sears and Roebuck, well, then we'll end up going on the defensive as the enemy attacks. And the enemy is going to come at you from every direction with everything they've got. Because war is a time of incredibly rapid change when each side is trying everything in its power to gain an advantage on the other. Case in point here, the Clearview AI recognition system. It's a facial recognition system that was built up by basically scanning the entire database of Instagram and Facebook photographs. It's used by law enforcement agencies around the world to recognize people. Well, it was repurposed by the Ukrainian government to recognize Russian soldiers, not just ones that they'd kidnapped or killed, but soldiers out in the field so that they could call the parents of those folks in Russia and tell them what was about to happen to their children. That is a weaponization of a product. And that's happening all of the time now. Back in February, Apple was forced to very quickly change all of the code supporting their AirTags. Now, AirTags are these absolutely lovely, remarkable items because you slap an AirTag inside your handbag or on your luggage, and then basically the entire network of Apple's iDevices will actually work to track all of your devices wherever they are. All of the devices collaborate in a big web of connectivity, which is great. It works really well, but there's a problem with that, which is that they work so well that AirTags have become the stalker's best friend. You can slip one into someone's purse without them knowing about it, or slap it on the bumper of a car, and then you're tracking someone with all of Apple's help. So, a product that's designed to track all sorts of things, well, it can be used to track all sorts of things. Apple doesn't seem to have really thought that through. Somehow, their product forgot to consider the future, a future that we never imagined, but a future where we are always at war with competitors, at war with markets, and yes, at war with your customers. And to that point, back in March in Switzerland, there were some folks who had been using a drug discovery artificial intelligence program to help them assist in the design of new drugs to save lives. And they asked themselves, could someone actually use this software that we're using to design chemical weapons? And so they reprogrammed it to see what would happen. And within 6 hours, that AI had designed 20,000 new chemical weapons. What happens if someone uses an AI to poke holes in your product, or to convert it from something that's useful into something that's dangerous, to find all of those weaknesses and exploit them? What happens then? They don't even need to use them. All they need to do is tell your customers about them, and your customers will flee. So how would you react if that happened? Because that's happening now. It's just not evenly distributed. And then in April, it was learned that 10 Downing Street had been hacked with Pegasus spyware, that basically all of the networks inside there and the Department of Foreign Affairs had been compromised. All of the UK's most private secrets were being spirited away. Now, I want you to imagine what would happen if that happened to your business or that happened to your product. How would you react? Because that is what's happening now. It's just not evenly distributed. But that's what the future is telling us. It's already happening in a few places today. Tomorrow, it's happening everywhere. This is the future. This is what the future looks like. And the only question that needs to be asked now is, what are you doing to prepare for that future? Now, if you're getting a bit scared about the future of your products, good. You need to be asking yourself one question. Are you scared enough? Andy Grove, who is the legendary former CEO of Intel, he wrote a book about that. He spelled it out in the title. Only the paranoid survive. And Intel, after Andy Grove left, Intel stopped being paranoid about its future. And it got fat, and it got lazy, and it completely missed the emerging market for mobile devices. They simply didn't have products that worked in that market. And that's because all of their other markets were so incredibly profitable and growing so well, they simply didn't care. They took their eye off the future. And they shouldn't have done that, because in 2006, Steve Jobs went to Intel and begged them to make a chip for his brand new, next year to be released iPhone. And Intel couldn't do it. So Intel has completely lost the billions and billions and billions of sales for all of the smallest devices in this world. It might never be able to get those products back, and it could have had most of the market in them. So ask yourself, are you paranoid enough about the future? But before you ask that, maybe you should ask yourself, do you even know enough to be paranoid? Do you know where the future is popping up? Do you know what the future of your product is? And I don't mean the next release. I mean the thing that your product does. What happens if that evolves into a radically different form? Do you know what that product looks like? Because it probably doesn't come from you. And it probably doesn't look like anything you'd expect. Yet it solves the same problem. It meets the same need for your customers, probably better and probably at a lower cost. And we have a great example of that here in Australia in Canva. Now, Canva offers what Adobe basically never could. All of its products are simple, they're easy to use, they're web-based, pretty much anyone can use them. They have a very nice free tier. And Adobe products, on the other hand, they're big, they're heavy, they're very carefully licensed, they're targeted at professionals who need high precision tools. And Canva right now is the second most successful startup in Australian history, right behind Atlassian, because they have figured out how to deliver the product that Adobe should have done, that Adobe could have done if Adobe had kept its eye on the future. Canva could have been Adobe's future. Adobe never saw it. And Adobe got rich and successful and complacent, and they were never paranoid enough to see the future that was staring them right in the face back when that future was small, until that future got too big to be stopped. Because right now, Canva's market capitalization as a private company is 1/5 of Adobe as a public company. And when Canva goes public, it is going to be too big to be stopped by Adobe. Maybe it will eat Adobe. And, you know, it's not like Canva needs Adobe. It may be that Canva looks at Adobe as the past of product. How did Adobe miss this? I mean, clearly their customers wanted this because they're signing up in droves, and this is what their product could have evolved toward. But it hasn't, and it won't until it's far too late to make a difference. So yes, you need to be out there having a really good look at the things that you think are interesting but aren't what you do, because maybe they do the same thing but in a different way, in a new way, in a way that represents the future that you need to be paranoid about, because only the paranoid survive. Now, there is one area where we can take a good look at how the future is popping up now in just a few places and isn't yet evenly distributed. It's one area of product that we really don't think too much about except when it goes spectacularly wrong. The login. Now, we have had logins for almost as long as we've had interactive computers. As soon as we needed more than one person using an interactive machine, we had to have logins for them. First, it was managing the files, and then it was managing communication because email comes out of that form of login. And then finally, permissions, so you can protect users from one another. And pretty much every product that's out there in the world has some sort of login and embeds these understandings into its foundations of design. We reckon that those foundations about login and identity are persistent and they're enduring. Nothing could be further from the truth. It is changing. Now, it's not changing everywhere and it's not changing all at once. This is one of the areas where the future is very unevenly distributed. But I'm going to show you one big example of how it's changing. So back in February, the White House issued a memorandum on what they call zero trust computing. Its preamble lays out this major point, which basically says everything. The foundational tenet of the zero trust model is that no actor, system, network, or service operating outside or within the security perimeter is trusted. So when someone logs in or logs on, that's not even the beginning of testing them. Testing them and testing their authority to access resources is a continuous process. You do it for as long as they're logged in, and it's the only way that any system in 2022 can even be moderately safe. And it is not the way our products work right now. It's not the way most of our products have been designed to work. And here's the thing. This memorandum states that the entire governmental apparatus of the United States of America has 1 year to come into compliance with this directive. Now, that's not going to happen, but they will try. And because so many systems touch the U.S. government and their systems, and because the U.S. government systems touch so many external systems, pretty much all of our connected systems will be forced to follow the zero trust model. Does your product do that? Have you even heard of zero trust before today? And if not, are you starting to feel a little bit paranoid? I hope so, because that small change actually marks a massive product transformation. It changes the way every product manages its security. It's the future. It's starting in a memo. It will begin with the most secure, the most confidential systems, though probably not at 10 Downing Street. That's just the immediate horizon. The next, say, 12 months, 18 months, 24 months. That's the future that's actually nearly upon us. After that, just a little bit further out, there's another future bearing down on us, another kind of login, another kind of identity. It's called federated identity, where someone logging into a product brings with them all of the credentials that they need to operate within the product. And they bring all of the proof required so that they can show that those credentials are valid, because those credentials are being supported by a ring of trusted authorities. Just as in real life, people and organizations will be vouching for one another continuously. So that means with federated identity, organizations such as yours will vouch for themselves, they'll vouch for their peers, they'll vouch for their members in those rings, and then you will be able to make a decision based on how much you trust the vouching parties, how much access you give them to their product. And it basically will immediately end identity fraud as we've known it. It doesn't mean it will end identity fraud. Identity fraud will adapt and change. But it does mean that the moment that someone logs into your product, they bring not only their identity, they bring the federation of organizations and individuals and groups who are vouching for them. It is still very early days with this, and we will all be needing a lot of help to be operating within a world where we need to continuously verify our identities via the zero trust requirement. But in this world, it's not just our identity, our assets are also attached to this, because within this ring is a wallet, and within that wallet is all of our digital assets. Digital assets started out a decade ago looking like bitcoins, but they're starting more and more to look like all of the money and all of the property deeds that we've always known. And those assets will be tied deeply to our federated identity. They will be coming with us everywhere, and they will be coming into the product. Now, if that sounds far away, I can assure you it's already in its very early stages. That future is already here. It is just not evenly distributed. Now, is your product ready for that? How does your product operate in that world? Are you paranoid enough that you can avoid a future where federated identity makes your product too hard to use or too insecure to use or simply meaningless to use? So here we are, at the start of the day, at the end of this part of the journey. Remember that the future is always already here, and the only defense that you can raise against that future is to prepare for it. Back to you, Ken.